What if I told you financial systems don't collapse in a single day? They tend to break in 4 predictable stages, quietly, methodically, and often when people feel safest. And right now, America is already in stage 3. The giveaway is hiding in plain sight. You won't hear this on financial news. You won't see it in central bank reports. But if you know the pattern, the same one that preceded the decline of Rome, Venice, the Dutch Republic, and the British Empire, you can see it unfolding in real time. In interest payments, in payment rails, in the way nations quietly reroute trade while pretending nothing's changed. This isn't speculation, it's historical mechanics, and it's already affecting your paycheck, your savings, and your sense of financial security, whether you realize it or not. In this video, I'll show you the 4 stages that have preceded major financial breakdowns throughout history. Not as theory, as a lived reality. And I'll reveal exactly which stage we're in today and what that means for you personally. Here's the first truth most people miss. Collapse rarely starts with panic. It starts with comfort. With a system that works so well for so long that everyone forgets it can fail. That's where we are now, not at the edge of chaos, in the quiet middle of a slow-motion unraveling that began decades ago. Let me show you stage 1, excessive privilege. Every dominant financial system begins with strength. After World War II, America emerged with intact factories, deep capital markets, and the only currency trusted globally. The Bretton Woods system cemented the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Oil was priced in dollars, trade flowed through New York, and America gained what French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called an exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow endlessly in its own currency, while the rest of the world had to earn dollars before they could spend them. For decades, this worked brilliantly. It funded highways, moonshots, and middle-class prosperity. But privileges breed dependency, and dependency breeds recklessness. Why raise taxes when you can issue bonds? Why cut spending when markets absorb your debt without question? Each deferral felt rational. Each choice made political sense. But cumulatively, they created a feedback loop. More borrowing, more growth, then more borrowing. The system didn't just grow, it became addicted to its own success. This is where Rome stood in 100 AD, where Britain stood in 1910, where America stands today. Not weak, overconfident. Now, most people think stage 2 is crisis, but it's not. Stage 2 is weaponization. When a system becomes too big to fail, its managers stop maintaining it and start using it as a weapon. America didn't lose dollar dominance through weakness. It accelerated its decline by turning the financial system into a tool of foreign policy. Since 9/11, US sanctions have exploded from under 1,000 targets in the early 2000s to well over 10,000 today. Freeze assets, cut off SWIFT, block oil sales. Each move felt justified in the moment, but each move sent one message to the world. Your money isn't yours if it's held in Western institutions. And the world listened. When Russia's $300 billion in reserves were frozen in 2022, every finance minister asked, could that happen to us? The answer was yes. And that realization triggered the quietest financial revolution in modern history. Nations aren't abandoning the dollar because they hate America. They're building alternatives because they refuse to be held hostage by a system they can't control. This is exactly what happened to Britain after World War I. The pound was still the global reserve currency, but London used it to enforce imperial control, blocking trade, manipulating exchange rates, punishing dissenters. The result? Nations began holding gold instead of pounds. Trade shifted to bilateral deals. The system didn't collapse, it hollowed out. Which brings us to stage 3, fragmentation. This is where we are right now. Not collapse, fragmentation. The quiet rewiring of global commerce into parallel systems that bypass the center. Look at the data. In 2000, roughly 70% of global trade was invoiced in dollars. Today, it's closer to 60%. That shift alone represents trillions in transactions no longer flowing through American systems. This shows up as higher prices, tighter credit, and less room for mistakes. Two examples tell the story. First, China's CIPS, its cross-border payment system, is now processing billions in yuan settlements outside SWIFT, especially for trade with Brazil, Russia, and Southeast Asia. Second, Saudi Arabia, the long-time guardian of the petrodollar, has begun accepting yuan for oil sales to China, settled through Shanghai's oil futures market. These aren't symbolic gestures, they're structural shifts. BRICS nations are discussing common currencies. The EU quietly built Instex to bypass US sanctions on Iran. India and the UAE now settle trade in local currencies. None of these systems threaten dollar dominance today, but together they create optionality, the ability to keep trading when Western rails close. And optionality changes everything. When nations know they have an exit ramp, they negotiate differently. They take different risks. They align with different partners. The center doesn't explode. It becomes irrelevant. This is how Venice fell. Not with invasion, with irrelevance. When Portuguese ships found sea routes around Africa, Mediterranean trade dried up. Venice's merchants still sailed their gondolas. Their banks still issued bonds. But the center of gravity had shifted to Lisbon. The city remained beautiful, but it was no longer essential. And that's the danger America faces now. Not dramatic collapse, gradual irrelevance. But here's what most analysts miss. The next rails aren't just payment rails, they're data rails. In the digital age, data has replaced oil as the world's most valuable resource. And nations are realizing whoever controls data flows controls the future of AI, finance, and national security. Europe passed GDPR not just for privacy, but to assert sovereignty over citizen data flowing to American tech giants. China built the Great Firewall and required data localization not merely for censorship, but to ensure its AI development isn't dependent on foreign servers. India now mandates payment data stay within borders. Brazil requires health records stored locally. This isn't just regulation, it's sovereignty reassertion in the digital age. And it directly impacts you. When data can't flow freely, credit scoring, fintech innovation, and even job-matching algorithms become fragmented. Your digital life may soon operate under different rules, depending on which apps you use, which cloud stores your data, and which regulatory zone governs your financial activity. Chinese AI trains on Chinese data under Chinese rules. European AI develops under GDPR constraints. American AI evolves within US legal frameworks. These systems will increasingly diverge not just in capabilities, but in values embedded in their design. And that divergence shapes everything from medical diagnostics to loan approvals to criminal justice algorithms. The power to define these systems becomes the power to shape society itself. And America is losing that power not through military defeat, but through regulatory overreach and technological arrogance. Which leads us to stage 4, constraint. This is the final stage. The point where the system can no longer adapt. Debt service consumes so much revenue that there's nothing left for investment, innovation, or crisis response. Interest payments already exceed defense spending. Infrastructure crumbles. Productivity stalls. Wages stagnate. The state becomes a debt collector, not a builder. Britain reached this stage in the 1960s. Its national debt was 130% of GDP. Half its budget went to servicing past obligations. It couldn't fund new industries. It couldn't respond to decolonization. It couldn't compete with American manufacturing. The empire didn't fall to war. It faded from rigidity. America is approaching this threshold. Interest payments already top $1 trillion a year, more than defense. By 2030, they could consume 20% of all federal revenue. Every dollar spent on debt service is a dollar not spent on climate adaptation, semiconductor fabs, or worker retraining. It shows up as higher taxes, less room for public services, and slower growth in real wages. The system isn't breaking under strain. It's losing slack, the buffer that allows societies to absorb shocks and adapt to change. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We're not doomed. History isn't fate. But patterns repeat because human nature doesn't change. Leaders always choose short-term gain over long-term stability. Nations always weaponize their advantages until others build alternatives. Systems always optimize for efficiency until they lose resilience. So where do we go from here? If you're in stage 1, you build. If you're in stage 2, you reform. But if you're in stage 3, as we are, you adapt. You stop assuming the system will protect you. You diversify your dependencies. You build skills valued across multiple economies. You maintain relationships that span different networks. You keep some savings in assets with intrinsic value, not just one currency, but options that retain worth when systems fragment. This isn't paranoia. It's prudence in a world losing its single operating system. Because the real cost of financial breakdown isn't the crash. It's the narrowing of possibility before the crash arrives. The caution that creeps into lending decisions. The hesitation before launching a business. The extra cash held in reserve that could have funded growth. These absences don't appear on balance sheets. They appear years later as reduced dynamism when societies need innovation most. So let me leave you with this. Financial systems don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they become too rigid to bend when the world changes. America's advantage remains real. Its innovation capacity, its rule of law, its deep markets. But those advantages now operate within tightening boundaries, not from external conquest, but from internal arithmetic. The question isn't whether the system will break. The question is whether you'll recognize the stage you're in and act accordingly. We're in stage 3, fragmentation. The quiet unraveling. The time to prepare isn't after the dam breaks. It's while the cracks are still small enough to navigate around. Can the US reset in the next 5 to 10 years? Or is fragmentation locked in? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to understand how to navigate each stage of financial transformation, subscribe now. Because awareness isn't fear. It's the first step toward agency.